Well, Grandma, this is a special year for you, isn't it?
Oh, getting older than a lot of all my aunts and uncles.
How old are you going to be on Christmas Day?
The big 80.
The big 80. Can you tell us about that Christmas morning in 1908?
I don't know anything about it, just what I'm told. Told that I came, they put me under the Christmas tree. When my brother and sister got up in the morning, he was 6 and she was 2, and they found me under the Christmas tree. That's what we've always known.
What did they think?
Well, of course, they believe Santa Claus brought me.
Who were your brother and sister?
Uncle John and Aunt Grace. She's 82 and he's 86.
Well, you could just about remember that then.
I had him here night before last for supper, and I didn't think to ask him that. We did talk about a lot of old things, and I didn't think to ask him. I'm going to ask him someday.
How did you get your first name?
Because I was born on Christmas. I would have been Blanche. That's my middle name. And I'm sure glad that I didn't get the name of Blanche for his first name. I don't like it.
How do you feel about having your birthday at Christmas?
Oh, I've always liked it. As far as not getting gifts on my birthday, none of us ever got gifts on our birthday. We got a birthday cake. We didn't know any different. We grew up real poor. And we didn't know we were poor. We grew up rich in a lot of other things, but we didn't know we were poor. So we never looked for a birthday gift. I always got a birthday cake, even though it was Christmas, so it was still birthday cake.
Well, I know that you are half German, half Dutch. I'd like to have you tell about the German side first. Your grandmother and grandfather are from Germany, and it was Charles Kaler and Caroline Albrecht. Is that right?
Yeah, Albrecht. And we grew up about a mile from them. We went through their yard every day going back and forth to school, but still we never could get well acquainted because there was a language barrier. We had a hard time communicating. We did pick up, us older ones especially, we picked up a lot of German that sticks with us, was because my mother always talked German to her folks. I can run off a few things of German which my grandchildren and my children get a kick out of hearing.
Like what?
Oh, in Lauterbach with Mr. Verloren, ohne Skripgate and Heim. I don't get it right, but I know how it's supposed to go. There's a lot of little ditties and the names of things. For years I called my bedroom slippers Commotion. That was my grandma's name for her house slippers, house shoes. Even Doris and Helen, yeah, that's all they do. Commotion. Commotion your house slippers.
When they came over from Germany, they already had children. Which ones had they had?
They had Aunt Mary, or Aunt Marie, but we always called her Aunt Mary, Aunt Marie, one or the other. And they had Wilhelm, and Aunt Minnie, Wilhelmina. My grandpa came over first to find a place to settle, and he picked Pennsylvania. That was a quick run from getting off of the boat. And then he sent for Grandma, and he had her cousins in Montague arrange the passage for her, so they thought she might as well come here and visit her. They were in Montague, Michigan. So when Grandpa found that out, why, he came here and made a settlement here instead. That's how we grew up here.
What kind of work did he and your grandmother do?
Well, they did everything to bring in a penny. Worked in the sawmills were pretty much over, the big sawmills, but he worked in the shingle mills. They picked all kinds of wild fruit and berries and willows. They picked willows and make wicker furniture, I guess. I don't know what they did. They picked willows. But did they peel them? I think they peeled them. Yeah, they'd have to be peeled. And they did a little bit dry farming, what you can do in Fruitland Township. Had a cow and pigs and chickens and a horse. I don't know if they ever had a team.
They had a very long married life, didn't they?
Yeah. When would they have gotten married? In I don't know when they got married.
Well, they were married well over 60 years.
Oh, well over 60 years. They must have been married near 65 years when my grandma died.
Your grandma died first in 1932.
Yeah, she died of the flu. She most likely got pneumonia with the flu. Oh, she was 86 years old.
Grandpa Kaler lived to 1941. Do you remember him in his latest years?
No, I didn't get to see him. We were too busy raising our own family and making a go of it during the Depression. I went to Grandma and Grandpa's the night before Grandma died. Your dad and I and the two little girls went there. And she was awful sick. They had the doctor there, but we came home and then we found out she died that night. But then Grandpa was already living with Aunt Minnie. They had their separate living quarters, but they were under the same roof. Aunt Minnie took care of him until he died. He had one stroke after another, I guess. But he was 91. He died in 41.
Can you talk about your mother? She was born Helena Kaler, later Helena Meal. How do you remember her?
I remember her as a very happy person. Oh, we didn't appreciate it then, but the hardship that she had to put up with. And my dad wasn't the easiest person to live with. And with having one baby after another every 2 years, having killed 12 children in 23 years, she always had a song on her lips. If she wasn't crying. We never knew what the crying was for, but I know there was times that she cried. I imagine it was because Dad could have been on one of his streaks. He was a very good man. No drinking. I can say no smoking, but he chewed tobacco. That's worse yet to live with.
Your mother died at quite a young age, didn't she?
Oh yeah, she was 47. She died of inactive thyroid. They called it myxedema. And I'm sure we all think she had diabetes also. So in 3 years' time, she run down to nothing. So those last 3 years, I wasn't home. I was married.
Your parents had 10 children that grew to adulthood.
Yeah.
Now in 1988, how many are still with us?
9. Oh, Leona, she died. That was tragically. She died of adhesions after a cesarean. But she lived 2.5 years. More than 2.5 years after the cesarean. But she had filled up with adhesions and they choked her out.
Well, let's switch to the Dutch side of your family. Now, I know that you never knew your grandfather. His name was Johannes Meal, and his wife was Grietze Blau, or no, excuse me, Jantje Sippema.
No, her mother was Jantje Sippema. Her maiden name was Sippema.
Okay.
His maiden name was Meal.
Right. Well, he died before you were born.
Oh, yeah, he died even before my folks were married.
Could you tell us about your grandmother, Meal?
Well, she was a company grandma. We liked her, but we never got too acquainted with her. She was good to my mother. I guess my dad took after his dad, so she knew. She had sympathy for my mother and for Aunt Minnie. She was always good to us. She would slip my mother a $10 bill when she could. She did the same thing for Aunt Minnie. She treated them both the same. She knit. I still have the pair of mittens that she made for all of us grandchildren. She must have made 20 pair in about 1922. I still have mine. I believe I'm the only one out of the 20 that has the mittens.
Well, their son was also named Johannes Meal, but I remember him as John Meal. Could you tell us how you remember your father?
I remember my father is a good, caring father, but also we could run in the corners when he got a tantrum on. Had a hot temper.
What does this picture show?
That's when he was a chef in a New York restaurant. He was a cook in a lumber camp. He was a jack of all trades, a master of none. My dad would lay on the couch. We had an old-fashioned couch. Didn't have any back on it, didn't have any arms on it, just had a roll up at one end. And he would lay there at night and read stories, and we'd gather around by a kerosene lamp. And he would read a chapter of the book, read regular out of a book. Where we got the books from, I don't know. And then it was time to go to bed. But we'd beg. And then sometimes he would let us drag him outside. He would just be limp. And we would all gather around and pull on him. Pull on his feet and his arms and pull him outside. I can remember that. I'll have to ask the other girls if they remember it.
Well, there were enough of you to do it, weren't there?
Yeah, this was even after Johnny had left home. He didn't run away, I don't mean that, but all kids had to go down, get a job and go to work and stay with someone else, stay with an aunt or something. And Johnny was already working in 1918 when the war ended. He was working at the paper mill and he had just had his 16th birthday. So he was working when he was 15. He had worked at the Alaska, that was before the Norwich. And then he worked at the paper mill. So all kids went to work at 13, 14, 15 years old. I don't say all of them, but those that were come from poor families. You weren't any better than the rest of them. You had to go to work.
I'd like you to remember one particular incident. It's probably one of your very earliest memories. Your family started out in the city of Muskegon and then moved out into the country when you were very young. Now, when was that, and what do you remember?
That was in July of 1912, and I was 3 years and 8 months old about. I was going to be 4 years old Christmas. And I can't remember living downtown. The only thing I can remember is the doll buggy. I never remember that doll buggy after that, so if that was left or sold or what, or maybe it came along, I don't remember. That's the only thing I remember from downtown. I remember riding out in a buggy with, and I was so little, there was a lady with us, with my mother and the rest of the little kids on the way out, and that happened to be Aunt Minnie. And because you had to hire a horse from downtown, somebody had to ride with you to take the horse back. That's what Aunt Minnie did. Pa and Johnny and the movers, a team of horses and a wagon with the furniture piled on, went out ahead and dumped the furniture off in the bushes and went back. Left my dad, and they pitched the tent. And I don't even remember seeing the tent. But I remember looking out and seeing the old cook stove, the same kind that I got on the shelf out there now. The little miniature one. Old cook stove setting out the door. Must have been looking out of the opening of the tent and seeing that stove setting out. And it was raining. The stove, that's where my mother did the cooking that summer. And I remember that there was a pig, and the pig was always running away. They say that I tried to go home. I wanted to go home. I cried and wanted to go home. And I went wandering off in the bushes too. But that I don't remember. But I do remember the pig running away. And I remember the box off in the bushes with a hole in the top.
What was that for?
Well, that was our toilet. I remember that. And I remember riding on my dad's shoulders with one leg hanging down each side of his neck, holding on his ears, riding over to where he was building the new little house. It was a house, but it was nothing but a shack. But that's where we lived.
How long did you live in that tent?
We just that summer. By fall, they got into the house, and I got a picture of it. And Uncle Johnny wants a copy of it. It's Aunt Grace and Aunt Florence and me, and the house in the background. We lived in this house without that lean-to on. All there was the main part. The first winter. I don't know how they did it, but Uncle Johnny says he climbed a ladder into the attic. Well, the attic must have been much more than just a place to go and lay down. It wouldn't have been room for a bed. He'd have to use just a mattress and lay on it. And he was 9.5 years old, nearly 10. Then the next spring, my dad put that kitchen on. That was used as a kitchen.
Is that the lean-to you're talking about?
Well, then we lived for a number of years with just that. And so my parents' bedroom must have been right in the living room, must have been a bed in the living room, and I can just remember that. And then there was another room on the main part that had 2 big beds in it where all of us girls slept, and John must have went up in the attic, he says.
2 big beds. How many of you were there?
Well, there was Grace and me and Florence and Leona, and then Jeanette came along. So there were 5 of us.
A lot of people.
Yeah, a lot of people. And then Doris came and still didn't have any more room. And then in 1919 we figured it out that my dad added on that big lean-to that gave us a big bedroom and gave that one bedroom to my folks. So then there was no bed in the living room. We had to eat in that room too. And it had a stove in it to keep warm.
Pretty cramped quarters.
And in that big bedroom there was 2 beds and a cot. And then I can't remember Johnny being home anymore, that we were all girls until Pete and Lawrence came along. Of course, when Pete was just a little kid, he slept with me. I was the second mother.
How old was that?
Well, probably in 1919 when that room was built on, then I was 11 years old. I was already a second mother. I was the babysitter, big sister and second mother to each child that had to be cast off when a new baby came. 2 years old. So they all liked me. That's what Aunt Helen even tells me today. She liked to have me take care of her. So, because 1920 Mary was born, and I know that we had that room on when Mary was born and died. There was a separate little room with it, and they kept her overnight in the casket in that room. It was a sort of a storeroom, and used for a refrigerator in the wintertime, freezer. There was no refrigerators or freezers, no electric lights. Or
How did you heat your house?
with a potbelly, something like a potbelly stove in that living room. And had that range, or that cook stove that I told you about. That was in the kitchen. And there was a trap door in the floor that would be lifted up, and you go down the steps to not much more than a hole in the ground. It was used for a cellar to store all the canned fruit and the apples and the potatoes. We were lucky if we got apples, potatoes and carrots and cabbages for food for the winter.
Can you tell us about your most vivid memories of your childhood, growing up in the Meal family? What did you do in the wintertime and the summertime, and some of your school memories?
Well, we had to walk pretty near 3 miles to school, about over 2.5 miles to school. We didn't have school because some people don't understand that, but I know that. The school district wasn't rich enough to pay a teacher for those 2 months. So we only had 8 months of school. And no school in the wintertime. 7 months. We'd have 3 months, 4 months in the fall, and 3 months in the spring. We'd get out of school, but we didn't have no school during January and February at all. And we'd walk, so we didn't have to walk through the snow too much. But we were busy, us big kids. We would have to go out and cut wood, pile wood. We would go with my dad. A neighbor would have a big wood pile cut, buzzsaw come and throw the wood in a big pile, but it would have to be put into cords so that he could sell it, measure it. And my dad and all of us kids would go and pile that wood the way it had to be piled. It had to be piled 8 feet long, 4 feet high, and 16 inches long the wood was. And we would pile it. We would pile up 50 cords. And we'd get paid for that. All that stuff was to bring in money.
It's a lot of work.
We all worked. And we had to cut our own wood. As kids, the bigger kids, by the time we was 10 years old, we were working. In the summertime, we were working when we were 5 years old, picking berries or picking arbutus in the spring. Take them downtown and go down the street and go into the stores or go above the stores into the apartments that people lived. I get scared now when I think about it. We would go up those long stairs up to apartments above the stores.
What was it like for you to travel from where you lived way out in the country into the city of Muskegon? That was some distance.
That was with a horse. Later on, I got to go in with the car, down the old rutty roads, dry in the summertime, snow in the winter, wet in the spring. And it would be 4.25 miles to the gravel road, even the main road, what is Whitehall Road now, was gravel. And then you travel that gravel road into town.
How did you get across the causeway?
There was two-way road, right lane and one in and one out lane, and there was popple trees on both sides of the road. It was pretty dry, where now it's, over and south going in and coming back, separate, and each one's 2 lanes.
When you traveled with the horse, did you have a horse-drawn cart?
No, we had a wagon. We had a buggy, or we had a wagon. A buggy was just light. There couldn't many people ride in a buggy, and you couldn't haul very much stuff. You couldn't haul crates of berries.
Was this wagon yours, or did you borrow it?
No, my dad had a wagon, and he had 1 horse. Later on, he built a barn, and we had a cow and a horse, and every spring we'd buy a pig, and then in the fall they butchered a pig for meat for the winter.
Tell us about the time you left home. What were the circumstances of it, and what kind of employment did you find?
Well, I left home in August under very happy circumstances because I was going to help the family. I would give money home out of the little bit that I earned. That was the arrangements, that if I went, why, I was to help the family. And so I went to stay with my sister Grace and Oscar downtown and stayed with them, and I got a job at the Amazon. Very little wages. I only made 16.5 cents an hour. but I still give $5 every 2 weeks to my dad to help the family at home.
Can you tell us about this photograph of you?
Well, that was I left home in 25 in August, and then this picture was taken in December of 26 when I was 18 years old.
Okay.
Down.
Can you tell us how you met Dad?
Well, my cousin, in fact, my double cousin, Pauline, and her husband had known the Mullalys way years ago. When I lived with Grace and Oscar, Pauline and her husband Gus Johnson lived just across the alley. Our places back to each other. They rented an apartment back there. And my husband, my future husband, lived in a room right next to them. And they told him they knew of a nice girl for him. So they introduced me to him. She came over and got me. And I met him, and so we went on from there. We're married a year later. Very good man. This is your dad in his little sports car. They called him a road louse. They were a stripped-down Model T. Parked out in front of his aunt's house in Chicago on Cottage Grove Avenue. This was in 1923. So he was 22 years old at the time. This is before I ever met him.
Can you tell us about his parents and how they came to be in Chicago?
Now, his mother and father, Charles Mullally and Elizabeth Dillon, they met in the old country in Tipperary, Ireland. And he came over here, and he was a painter and a wood finisher. He worked for the Pullman coach company in Chicago. And he went back to Ireland again and got her to agree to come over here. So she followed him over. She didn't come with him. She came over later when they could arrange her passageway. She had to work housework for rich people. They were poor too. She came over and she came to New York where her brothers and sisters lived. Each one grew up and had to make their way in the world. And I don't know when she came to Chicago, but she came over and they got married in 96. She came over here in about 94, I guess. And they lived in Chicago and had numerous children. And then they wanted to come better place to raise children and get out on a farm, big promise, get on a farm and make your own living. But it didn't work. They went back to Chicago for a spell. And then they came back here again and lived on Horton Road in Lakeland Township. He was a painter. He painted, besides doing farming, raising chickens and pigs and cattle on a small scale. They did everything to make a living. Had a berry farm.
Grandpa Mullally died at a relatively young age. Can you tell us the circumstances?
Yes, he was tragically burned. House, garage, his truck, everything. In April 17th of 1932. He was draining gas to help a friend that had thought he'd run out of gas down the road. Turned out that his gas tank wasn't empty. But he climbed underneath of his truck. That was the way you drain gas. You'd open the petcock underneath, take out a little plug, and the petcock, little plug didn't come out. the whole welding came out and left the whole tank of gas pour down on him. And somebody reached a lantern underneath to him. Well, he run out a flaming street, dropped in front of the garage. But the garage went up that quick, and there was no fire department. It all went up in no time at all. House. He was 58 years old, comparatively young. Grandma made her way. There was no Social Security or no income. By working, going to Chicago and worked for Bloom's that owned a bakery, helped them through the winter. Making it in the kid. Dick and Tut and George were still home yet. They helped her. So she made her way until she was old enough to get 65 years old and got what they called a old age pension. You had to be destitute to get it. She lived a long life.
She was 100 years old when she died in 1976. She died on New Year's Day.
She was 100 years old on the 2nd of December, and she lived until New Year's, into the New Year, so that made her, she lived into another century.
You were with her when she died, weren't you?
Yeah. Your dad and Uncle Jim and I, we got there, and we stood with her about, up to 2 hours, I guess. She passed away. We knew she was going because they called us and told her. We knew she was going for weeks and months before that. She was just gradually aging and fading away.
Was it a very peaceful death?
I guess it was. She had broken her hip 5 years before that and hadn't really walked after that. We don't know whether, she claims she didn't fall. She says her leg just let her down, so they say some of these old people that break their hip, the hip breaks and they fall down. If you don't fall down, break the hip. It's brittle.
Can you tell us now about your marriage and your early days of wedded life with Dad? Where did you live? And also show us a picture of the young couple.
Well, we lived in one room in Aunt Grace's, my sister's place, where she rented out rooms, the same place that I had lived with her. And we lived there from February till April, and then we moved out and lived in 2 rooms of a great big rambling house. We closed into 2 rooms because your dad had bought an old place a couple of years before that, but he had people living in it. So until they could move out, we lived in this old house. Had to carry the water in and carry the water out. There was some lettuce crate for a washstand and a water pail. And then in November we moved into our own place, and that was again an old house, and the wind blew in it and through it. But I worked, we were gone all day. We had a little stove, oil stove to cook on, and a round stove to heat the place with, and we just build up a fire in the morning, get warm, and not make too much of a fire so it would be safe to leave it, come home and light the fire again and keep warm. Go to bed with the chickens, because what else was there to do? We had to get up early in the morning and go back to work again. And we lived there. We had the 2 babies when we lived there. We had Doris in 30 and Helen in 31. When Helen was a month old, where the people that had built this old house and farm, they wanted to come back. So we were very glad because we couldn't make the payments on the place. The depression was setting in very deep. Dad was only working a couple days a week, so we rented the little house.
Can you show us a picture of you as a couple? And also tell about the kind of work that Dad did during the Depression and then later on?
Well, your dad worked in the shops. He was a grinder. He worked as a machinist. He was an expert grinder. He ground all kinds of parts for anything and everything. He ground piston rings in the Muskegon piston ring. During the Depression, he worked on the roads, and we got script for it. You just got a slip of paper that allowed you to buy so much grocery. And he would work that out, so he earned every penny he got, everything that we got. And that wasn't very much. It was $3 a week for 4 people. Of course, you could buy a quart of milk for 6 cents and a loaf of bread for 6 cents, a dozen eggs for 8 cents, 10 cents. And then he'd work on WPA. That was Works Projects Administration. He made more money there, but only so much. You couldn't only get so many hours, and it took the money to run the gas to go, because sometimes he'd have to drive 6, 8, and 10 miles to go where they were working on putting in roads. He worked on the state park where the highway is now. That was all done by shovel and wheelbarrow. No big machinery there. He got, I think, $12 a week. And then he went back into the work. His first job was at the Muskegon piston ring, grinding pistons. And then he got into the Continental. Got laid off at the piston ring, got back into the Continental where he had worked before. And that's where he stayed until he retired. He worked, the last job he did was assembling airplane motors. He liked that a lot better.
Talk to us about Dad's hobbies that he had during his marriage and also later on after he retired.
Well, he had a lot of hobbies even before we bought the place. When we lived in the little house, he was great. He played all kinds of musical instruments. He never had a lesson, really, only just from a friend showing him how. He picked it up by ear, but he would pick it out by note until he memorized it, and then he would play. He played the piano. He played, years ago, he would play on the organ for square dances, or the old-fashioned pedal organ, and he would second fiddle for square dances. He could play accordion, guitar, mandolin, harmonica. He could even make tunes on a juice harp.
I remember him playing the banjo with Uncle George.
Banjo, I forgot to mention, yes, he had a banjo too. Then he got interested. He had time on his hands during the Depression. No long winters, no outside work to do, not even in the summertime, living on a little lot, little house. And he read up on it, and he knew a man that had made violins, and so he got interested, and so he picked up making violins. And this first one, in that little house where there was no doors between the rooms, the house was 16 by 20, the whole thing, with 2 little kids climbing on the chair behind him, looking over, hanging over his shoulder, and he made this his first violin in 1933. Then he made one again in 1934 while we still lived there and nothing to do. But he did make one again in 56, and he wanted to make a 4th one, so he'd have one for each one of his children. It's a shame none of them learned the music like he did. We never appreciated that he was such a talented man. Then he, when we got the house here, when we got the house, got the place of our own, he had the hobby of planting trees until I'm swamped with trees. He planted little ones 4 inches high, but they have grown up 50 feet high now. And I've had to have them cut down, the wind would blow them over, or they get into the septic tank. Oh, this place was known as the place with all the trees around it. They're pretty. Then after he retired, he gardened. He had a workshop, built a lean-to on the garage. He had a workshop in his garage, but after he retired, he built a lean-to on the back of the garage, had a workbench. He had a lathe, drill press, grinders, little sanders. Time was never heavy on his hands. He always found something to do. He gardened until up the last year that he lived was the last year he didn't have a garden. He enjoyed it. And he enjoyed the dog that we inherited from Charlie. Charlie got a dog, and then he got married with German Shepherd Ginger. And then he got married and couldn't take the dog with him. We inherited it. And although Dad had always said he didn't care for dogs, he sure fell for that dog. That dog went everywhere with him for a long time, in the car every time the car went out. Alongside of his chair and feeding her snacks. Until I said, no, that wasn't good. She had to get fed at a certain time.
I remember Ginger very well. I remember her sleeping in bed with me and pushing me out of bed. I only did that a couple of times. There was no room for a German Shepherd in there.
No, he never had her in bed with him. She never came in our bedroom. But she sure got first number one around here. Until she got too old, her hips deteriorated, and we had to put her to sleep, which broke Dad's heart.
What happened to his garden from the time he started it until 10 years later, year by year?
Until he quit. You mean in the 10 years that he could run it? Well, he enlarged it. He had everything in it. He had flowers, cucumbers, squash, beans, strawberries, raspberries, peach tree. Oh.
Sean, what do you remember about Grandpa's garden?
I just remember coming out here sometimes, eating some things from his garden.
Yes, that was nice. We'd pick peas and
nice.
beans, and we'd eat them right off the plant. And we'd have to watch you kids to keep you from stepping on the plants. We've talked about Dad's hobbies. He had a lot of interests, and you did too. Can you tell us what kinds of things you like to do during your marriage and then in recent years?
Well, I did everything that came along. I, of course, kept house and sewed. I sewed all the girls' clothes. I sewed their baby clothes before they were born. And I made most of my clothes. Sewed everything that I could. I pieced quilts for necessity years ago, for something to put on the bed. And then in 1937, Grandma Mullally would come over. We'd walk back and forth. Didn't have the gasoline to drive. Your Dad was still home. And so she got us to knitting. She never did knit much herself, not since I knew her. She knitted before that. But so even your Dad learned to knit. He knit a pair of mittens and he knitted a pair of gloves. But of course then he got busy working on his other hobbies. But I picked up the knitting, and I knit mittens, and I knit sweaters. I knit the girls' sweaters when they were in grade school. And then Charlie came along, and I made him little sweaters, made him little caps, little helmet-style caps. see, I wish I had one of those big ones there. I knit helmet caps for him in a bigger knit and a bigger size in different colors. For Dick, I knit the baby bonnets with the sweaters to match. For all of my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, little booties to match. I made mittens. I made mittens for all of my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. I made them for school, for poor children. And my last hobby is making Christmas stockings. I have made them for all of my children, their spouses, my grandchildren and their spouses, and for my great-grandchildren. And I knit their names in them. These don't have names in because these are for those that are unattached. I don't want them to be left with no stockings for their babies. So I have 8 made already to be left if I'm not able to knit when there is a need for another stocking. I make all different patterns, and I make the backs as pretty as the fronts. And the names, anybody can cross-stitch the names in when the need arises. They all have labels in, specially made with love by Grandma. I have a box that I have stored things in. I have scarves, mittens, little baby sweaters, pinks and blues and whites, mittens of different sizes and different colors. These helmets, the little baby helmets I make in a bigger size, like I said. I have 4 of those made. I have given one to Matthew, Kurt's little 2-year-old boy. I made snowsuits for Charlie and Dick when they were young that they wore, knitted. That was the style then. Nowadays they have these other kind of snowsuits. They have a sweater and pants and mittens and a cap, all to match. Some I would put borders or patterns in them. I made them for you too. The caps and the mittens and the sweaters. I made sweaters. I made, I must have made from 4 to a half a dozen sweaters for your dad. There was one good one left, and I gave that to Ruthie. A zippered, maroon-colored sweater, a real nice open sweater, open down the front with the zipper. And she's very proud of it.
Grandma, thanks a lot for talking to us, and you realize that you're talking to people who aren't even born yet.
Or talking to people that'll be here after I'm gone.
Well, do you have anything to say to all of those people? You and Dad really started something. There are going to be hundreds of people.
Well, your dad was a very good man, an honest, hard-working, faithful husband and father. Maybe you didn't always think so, but he was. And I wish we'd appreciated his music more. He would be 87 years old now. I sometimes wonder what he would think about me just living here all alone. It's pretty lonesome sometimes. But I have a good family. He left me with a good family.
You had a real accomplishment, didn't you? After he died, you had never really been a driver. What happened?
No, I never drove. Well, your dad didn't want me to drive. I gotta tell the truth. So I learned to drive after it. But he wanted it. That just be the last few months that he lived, he told Helen, he said he wished I could drive. So I hope he knows it.
Well, we certainly have memories of him.
I wish I could give you a more natural picture, but I can't act natural in front of that thing.
I think you did very well.